I'm going to work on the business rather than in the business. And then we start to lead. Look, I've got two kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. What happens at this inflection point here? That should be about 70% of our time. Then top right should be about 30% of our time. Clearly, we would prioritize the high impact, low difficulty. So this quadrant here, this top right hand quadrant, those are the things that we should prioritize. We all know there's no growth in our comfort zone, and there's no comfort in our growth zone. Are you one of those leaders who find themselves just too busy mopping up the floor to turn off the faucet? Well, the good news is you're not alone. Now, how many times have we all heard the expression, you should work on the business and not in the business? Like countless times, right? Here's the thing though, it's extremely rare to meet business leaders and entrepreneurs who truly grasp what this really means. More importantly, quite how to do it. Now, those leaders who really do understand, when they understand why it's so critical and they can put the principle into practice consistently, well, they significantly outperform those who can't. So, have you ever asked yourself, how will the work get done now if I'm not doing the work, if I'm not working on it? Okay, so it's tricky. Are you maybe overwhelmed by daily tasks, spending more time firefighting rather than fire prevention perhaps? Do you maybe struggle with delegation, feeling that the work won't get done right unless you do it yourself? Or maybe you're stuck in a vicious cycle of giving direction and micromanagement. Well, we all think we know why we need to stop managing and start leading. Problem is, we don't quite know how to actually do it. Well, guess what? Most don't even properly understand the why, because when we finally show you why, we'll then show you how. So if any of that resonates with you at all, then keep watching. That's why we've put together this episode just for you to help you understand exactly why and how we need to finally figure out how to stop managing and start leading. Welcome to Stop Managing, Start Leading, the podcast for leaders who need to stop managing and for managers who want to start leading. I'm your host, Antonio Garrido, and I'm the founder and president of My Daily Leadership. I'm a serial entrepreneur, I'm a business founder, and I'm a leader just like you. And I'm a 3 times author, and I have led businesses from ground level startups all the way to Fortune 60s with, I guess, billions in revenue and thousands of employees. What if I told you that the secret to exceptional leadership is much easier and much closer than you think? Every leader and every manager has the potential to become exceptional, the kind of leader that they, their people, and their business truly deserve. And you're no exception. You just simply need to discover the mindset, the tools, the competencies, and the habits to unlock that phenomenal potential. And that's where we come in. So before we dive into today's episode, allow me to introduce you to our very good friend, the subscribe button. So be a gorgeous poppet and subscribe to the My Daily Leadership YouTube channel today for actionable insights and practical tools in our podcast episodes that drop every single week. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, be sure to become similarly acquainted with our other dear friend, the follow button. Both will help you level up your leadership. So do it now. Okay, well, before we begin, I want to share a story with you. About 10 years ago, I was running my own business, and like many of you, I was consistently bogged down by daily tasks, working countless hours a week. I was the first to arrive in the morning, I was the last to leave at night, but I knew that I had to lead more and manage less. But, well, we didn't have the time, the resources, or the people to pass things off to, and I couldn't escape. I was stuck in this virtual circle. And I remember one night I was staying super late again at the offices, I don't know, to finish some urgent work. I was exhausted, and it hit me finally, look, something had to change. I realized that if I didn't change my approach, I'd never be able to grow my business or to lead effectively. And so I made the decision to talk to a world-class business coach. I needed to change something. I just didn't know what. Now, my coach showed me this model, and that's when I finally decided to focus on leading rather than managing. So I'd like to show you what I learned, and I'm hoping that it will completely transform your business, transform your leadership like it did mine. So let's dive in. If you're joining us on YouTube today, you'll see how we always introduce you to a critical leadership model or two by drawing it out live. And so I'm going to do that for you in a second. We're visual learners here at My Daily Leadership, or VLs, as we like to call them. Now, if you're listening on a podcast platform, because you're much more of an auditory learner, what we call NLs, and that's perfectly okay. That's okay too. But if you want to see the content that we're talking about, that we walk you through, drawn out in real time, well, then I guess you're going to have to switch over to YouTube now or later, and that's fine too. So the models that we draw in this episode and all future episodes will also be available to download online at all the www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast. That's www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast. Okay, so here we go then. So the question for today, I think, more than anything else, and let me introduce you to how we draw things here. So my question is, what does on, as in on the business, rather than in, as in in the business, what does that actually look like? Okay, so if you bear with us as we go through today's episode, we're going to answer that question. So a lot of people think, just before we dive into that, let me just draw you this quick, super duper quick image or quick diagram. A lot of people think, if you imagine that that's kind of revenue or profit or however you want to measure that, and over here we have time. A lot of people think, oh, well, when you start a business or when you join an organization, and let's imagine that, at the start of the year or whatever, or maybe even the start of the business, that this is what happens, right? Revenues do this over time, and it's fairly straightforward, and it's fairly linear, and it's fairly obvious, and it's fairly simple. Okay, I think we all are grown up and ugly enough to know that that isn't the case, and it looks more like this, right? That you kind of go up and down and up and down and up and down, and it goes all over the place, and you have some good days, and you have some bad days, and you have some good stuff, and you have some setbacks. So it doesn't look like this, it looks like this. Knowing that what I'm just about to draw you is kind of an average of stuff, right? There's no such thing as the perfect model, but it's the principle I'd like you to get your heads around today. So let's just kind of extend this out big time, all right? So let's take this as a baseline. And for those auditory listeners, I'm just drawing a straightforward, XY diagram. Revenues up the left-hand side. I guess that's the Y, the Y-axis. So let's put revenues up here, and then along the bottom, along the X, we're going to put time. Okay, so let me show you what happens. Typically, as we let's just extend that just a touch. So let's assume then that we're averaging out, and listen, I know on average the Himalayas are flat, right? But just go with me for a second, because it's just a principle I need you to figure out. So let's imagine that time goes along and we're managing, right? So we're just along here, along this line, managing. We're managing the business, right? Because there aren't enough people, just because that's our MO, but whatever, right? So we're managing the business. And we hope that over time, this will extend out forever and ever and a day, right? Okay, so we know that isn't quite the case, but there comes a point there comes a point, and it's the point that I had that fateful day when I was thinking there has to be a better way, where I decided to invest in finding the best business coach I could. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, let's talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. And so there comes a time where there's, let's call that inflection point 1, right? So there's an inflection point where somebody goes, okay, let's just pump the brakes here for a second. There has to be another way. There's got to be a better way. So we're just going to call this inflection point 1. And what I mean by that, inflection point 1, what I mean by that is we don't just think about it, we don't just talk about it, but we actually decide to actually do something about it. So this inflection point 1, where we say, okay, enough's enough. If I continue to do what I've always done, I will continue to get what I've always got, right? And so something has to change. We're going to call that big point right here, this inflection point 1. It's not thinking about it, it's not talking about it, it's not watching a YouTube video about it, it's not reading a book about it, it's actually saying, okay, today's the day, right? Today's the day we're going to make a change. And I'm going to start to lead this business. I'm going to work on the business rather than in the business. So just before we explore what happens after this inflection point, whilst ever I said a few moments ago, hey, listen, we hope things continue along the same vein, the same trajectory as ever. Typically, that isn't what happens. So somebody starts an organization, they start a business, or maybe they get a new leadership role, right, in the organization. And there comes a point where, it's the kind of all the economies of scale and everything has been done. And then what tends to happen is the business then tends to flatten off, because if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got, right? So then the business tends to flatten off. If we're lucky, maybe we'll get a bit of this. Typically, if we work harder and harder and harder and try and work more on effectiveness rather than efficiency, or rather just be super, 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 super efficient to the point that we become more effective. So we want this, typically doesn't happen. We want this, typically work harder and harder and harder, but we more often than not get that. Okay, and this is the point that, somebody says, okay, enough's enough, right? No more Mr. Nice Guy. Okay, so this point here, this inflection point, we're going to call the moment of truth, the MOT line, right? When somebody says, okay, it's time to not just think about it, to do something about it. So that moment of truth where we go from think to do. And we're going to talk about that in our upcoming episode. So we'll talk about it briefly today, but we'll go into much more detail next time. Okay, so we get the point. Something then happens, that moment of truth, that inflection point, and then we start to lead. So we're now starting to lead. And the business takes on a whole different trajectory. So we're now working on the business rather than in the business. And we're going to talk about what things need to happen for that to happen. But here's what then happens. We'll come back to that in a second, but here's what then happens. So the business takes on a higher trajectory. There comes another inflection point. We're going to call this inflection point 2, inflection point 2. So this is inflection point 2. What then happens is the business then increases even more, okay? Because the second inflection point, which is this point right here for those watching on YouTube, this point here is effectively what we call a strategic innovation milestone. Now, here's the thing about the strategic innovation milestone, because something in the organization happens, an opportunity is presented to the organization that would never have happened had we stayed on this management trajectory. So we're on a management trajectory. We make a decision, that moment of truth line, we start to lead, then the business takes on a much more steeper gradient of growth. And then at some point down the line, we meet this other inflection point 2, where there is a strategic innovation milestone, and then the business takes off like a rocket, okay? And this has been demonstrated, countless times. And the reason that strategic innovation milestone 2 comes along is simply because you're on it. You're on it and not just in it. Now, here's the magic. The reason that we see it, right, this strategic innovation milestone, we never see it when we're managing the organization. Why? Because it's a wood for trees. We're too busy, focused inward. We're looking through like a microscope, right? Management is like a microscope. And the thing about leadership, that's like a telescope. We're going to talk about that also in our next episode, right? So where we can start to see the bigger picture and start to see further. So that strategic innovation milestone never happens. It never happens when we're just managing the business. We have to stop managing, start leading, and then that reveals itself. Okay, good. We're going to talk about this moment of truth in our next episode. So let me just remind you about that. So that MOT is next episode. And by the way, all of these models and images that we're drawing and so on, they'll be available if anybody wants them, right? So we'll maybe tidy them up a little bit. If anybody wants them afterwards, just as an aid memoir, just, write to us, send us a note. You'll get all of our contact details somewhere, and we'll send you a tidied up image of this. But anyway, we'll keep going for now, okay? So let's think about then what happens at this inflection point here. And a good way to help us think about that is our good friend Dwight D. Eisenhower. So let's write this down. Eisenhower Matrix. Now, I know that a lot of you are very familiar with the Eisenhower Matrix, but for those that aren't, let's just unpick that for a second. So we may come back to this in a minute, and let's dive into Dwight D. Eisenhower's Matrix, as in the Dwight D. Eisenhower. I don't know if there's another one. President, actually, just for those, a little bit of trivia for you. So let's have a look at Dwight D. Eisenhower. Well, for those of you that are interested and don't know, he was 34th President of the USA. What I love is the 33rd President of the USA, so 33rd President of the USA, was Harry S. Truman. I know you all know that, but anyway, I think this is one of those kind of piece of Americana information that probably just foreigners like me are more interested than Americans themselves. Why is it that it's Dwight D. full stop Eisenhower, but it's Harry S. no full stop Truman? Why does that have a full stop and that doesn't? Well, anyway, so for those of you that don't know, that's because S was actually, that was his name. The S didn't stand for anything. His name was Harry S. Truman. You realize it was Dwight D, which stood for David, full stop, Eisenhower. Anyway, there you are. So there you go. So let's have a look at the Eisenhower Matrix. Was that interesting? Probably not. Okay. Do I do more of those as we go? Anyway, okay. Eisenhower Matrix. Okay, so for those that are drawing along and for those visuals, new piece of paper for those auditory learners, those ALs. What I'm just drawing here is a 4-box model. Some people call it BCG model, as in Boston Consulting Group, who kind of invented. Did you invent a 4-box model? I don't know, but so I'm drawing a 4-box model. Along the bottom, which I guess is the x-axis again, so quadrant 1, bottom left, this is stuff. We all do stuff that, let's call this the urgent stuff. Urgent. So there's stuff here that is not urgent, and then there's stuff here that is high urgency, so low urgency and high urgency. And then we have up the left hand side here, importance. In case you're following along. So then there's things that are low in importance, and there are things that are high in importance. So basically where we live, right, as leaders and as managers and people in the organization, if we kind of did a time and motion study and followed ourselves around for a week, and every half hour somebody on a clipboard was like trying to track where it is that you were operating, right, in terms of high importance, low importance, high urgency, low urgency, right? We could kind of do a time and motion study and figure out where we live. Okay, so let's think about what things live in those quadrants. So things that are low in urgency and low importance, right? Those are the things that, I'll just say that one more time slowly so we get it. Low urgency, so not urgent, and low importance. So neither are they important. Well, what should we do with those things? Well, we shouldn't do those things. So they're kind of like, they're things to consign to the bin, right? So they are, just don't do them. So delete those things. One of the reasons that we are not leading because we're managing is because we're actually not using our time effectively and our time well. So don't do those things, right? So delete those. The things that are high in urgency and low in importance, right? So they're urgent, but they're not that important. Remember now we're looking at this through the lens of a leader. Those are the things to delegate. Those are the things to delegate as opposed to do yourself. So this, in case you're running ahead with us, that's the bottom right-hand part of the model. That's our second D, which is delegate. The stuff that's in the top right-hand corner, which is high urgency and high importance, well, of course, we have to do those things because they're urgent and important. And we'll find ourselves, if we're not careful, that everything we do falls into the high urgency and high importance. We kind of, as leaders, we shouldn't do anything that has low importance. Everything we do should be important. What we're trying to organize, though, is a world where we're doing some stuff that's high urgency, but most of the time we want to live in the low urgency but high importance. And we've got to start figuring out what are the things that we are doing. We'll talk about that in a second. So come back to the top right-hand quadrant, which is the high urgency, high importance. Those are the few most important. The few most important. The few most important things, right? We shouldn't have, it shouldn't be that every single thing that we do is high importance and high urgency, because it's that trap that's going to keep you away from leading, because all you're ever doing is firefighting, because high urgency, high importance is firefighting. Come back to that in a second. Let's just finish off the model. So let's go to the top left-hand corners for those auditory learners, right? So those are the things that we have to diarize, right? Because they are important, but they're not urgent, and this is kind of where you should live most of the time. Again, we'll talk about it next week. We'll touch on it a little bit again today. So in other words, bottom left, not urgent, that should be 0% of our time. The high urgency, low importance, that should be 0% of our time. And unless we start to figure this out, we're not going to be able to find time to lead and not manage. The diarize, that should be about that top left, that should be about 70% of our time. Then top right should be about 30% of our time. Now, there are periods of time when it's, in times of critical crisis, that it flips over, right? So that everything that we have to do because we're in the middle of a crisis has to be important and urgent, but it shouldn't stay that way. It should flip back again. So we should try and live in 70% not urgent but high importance and 30% high urgency and high importance. No more than, and there are occasions where it goes over there in times of high stress and urgency and then comes back. our MO should be, we should always be asking ourselves, how do we move back into this quadrant? Okay. Now, let's just remind ourselves what Eisenhower said. Eisenhower said, let me just write it down here. It's quite long, so bear with me for a second. But Eisenhower said, I have two kinds of problems. The urgent and the important. By the way, this is the lesson my coach taught me. Now we'll keep going for the moment. Hopefully, it will reveal itself as we go along. Now, so the urgent are not important. And the important for the visual learners, can I just apologize for my writing? The are not urgent, and the important are not urgent. Okay, so this should start to be one of your mantras. If you want to get away from managing and start leading, one of your mantras should be, look, I've got two kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important and the important are not urgent, right? Which sounds a bit contradictory, but that really is where what we should be thinking about. We should be constantly reviewing what we're doing and kind of measuring it against importance and urgent. We'll come back to another way of looking at this in 1 second. I just want to take a moment to have a quick breather, and we'll develop this more in a second. Look, if this episode is resonating with you, if this is kind of helping you at least get your thinking in a certain order, if it's resonating with you and you're ready to take action on your most pressing challenges, splendid. Action bias. We're going to talk about action bias in a second, but action bias, that's the propensity to move things forward and to make changes and to actually make an imperfect start. But this principle of action bias is a leader's number one resource. It's not time, effort, energy, people, money. It's action bias, which means to do something, right? But some of you are probably thinking, okay, well, this sounds great, Antonio, but how exactly do we begin? Okay, that's a great question. And I've got just a tool for you. And you can head to all the W's, so www.mydailyleadership.com, or click the link in the description somewhere and right now. And so you can diagnose your leadership challenges in only 5 minutes. It's our leadership health check tool, and you can use it to benchmark yourself against the 5 core elements of exceptional leadership. And then you can come away with a really clear roadmap for your leadership development. So if you think about everything that we've been talking about and you don't have 5 minutes, look, don't let 5 minutes hold you back from what's holding you back. So have a look at that. www.mydailyleadership.com, or click the link in the description and take the health check tool. Figure out where your own particular issues are, okay? And don't forget to share your thoughts and questions and comments and any aha moments in the comments. Sharing is, after all, caring. Okay, so let's get back on track. Another thing I'd like you to think about, which kind of looks like the Eisenhower model a lot, right? Again, we'll talk about this in, I think, our 3rd or 4th episode coming up, is, look, when you figure out all of the things that you are doing, this is a great way to kind of help you prioritize yourself, right? Here are all the things that I'm doing, and I'm doing a million things, right? At any particular point in time. We just did that kind of, thought about that time and motion study. What am I doing? Is it important? Is it urgent? And tracking that stuff. If you have a look at your calendar and what's on right now, look at all of the things that you have to do. Try this. This is a variant on the Eisenhower model. This will really, really, really help. Think about this. So now we have another little diagram for those auditory learners, those ALs, right? Which is another kind of 4-box model. And think about things this way. There are things that you are doing that have high impact. So let's put high impact up here. And then there are things that you're doing that have low impact. And by the way, this tool that we're just going through now, this high impact, low impact, high difficulty, let's say here, high difficulty, and then things that are low difficulty. If you think about difficulty, if you think about all the things that you are doing, or even all the things that you have to do, and you start to plot things all over here. So let's just imagine you pick 10 things. There are 10 things that are going on. I hope there aren't too many more than that, right? I'll show you why in a second. But if we then plot these things on this little graph here, and say, well, okay, well, these are where all of the things live, all the things I have to do, right? We have things that are high impact and things that are high in difficulty. Tricky. But we do have things that are high impact and low difficulty. We have things that are low impact and low difficulty, and low impact and high difficulty. Well, which of those would we prioritize? Well, clearly we would prioritize the high impact, low difficulty. So this quadrant here, this top right hand quadrant, those are the things that we should prioritize. Coming back to Dwight D, right? The things that are high difficulty and low impact, we shouldn't even do, right? So we want to know the things that have the highest impact and that are the lowest difficulty. And once we start plotting those things, that also helps us get on track so that we stop managing and start leading. So let's come back to that. I have drawn in here 1, 2, 3, 4 things. Then we have 3 other things. That could be 7 things. But let's go back to our friend Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey said, if you have more than 3 priorities, or more than 3 or 4, I think he said, if you have more than 3 or 4 priorities, you have none. What is that? So let me just write Stephen Covey. That's Covey. So what does that tell you? That tells you that you really, really have to focus, laser focus on your priorities. And there will be lots of things that you're doing that just for expediency, right? Just for ease, that maybe aren't quite as important, but they may be easier to knock off. So we kind of cut ourselves a bit of slack. And what I'm trying to say is, stop doing that, because it's that thinking that keeps you on that lower grade trajectory before you can jump up again and before that strategic innovation. And also, whilst we're on the same point, our other good friend, Seth Godin of Purple Cow fame, Seth Godin says, if everything is in caps, I think you understand what I'm trying to say about that. If everything is in caps, in other words, everything is urgent. If everything is caps, then nothing is. If everything is caps, then nothing is in caps, because we just kind of get used to that noise, right? Okay. So where should we go from here? Let's develop this point even further. Let's think about, again, come back to that flip chart. Flip chart? No, not flip chart. The time and motion study. Clipboard. Okay, so the clipboard, the person that follows you around and for every half an hour decides, has a look at what you're doing, right? Let's have a look at this as a table. So we have this table here, and over on the left-hand side, we have manage, and on the right-hand side, we have lead. And let's kind of figure out, well, how much time are we managing and how much time are we leading? Well, we know what managing is. That's kind of doing things. And we know what leading is. That's being... let me show you what leading and managing is just for a quick second. We're going to talk about this in our next episode. So let me just draw a super quick other model down here where this person with a clipboard, we can figure out, are the things that we're doing people focused, or are the things that we are doing task focused? Are the things that we are doing reactive, are the things that we're doing proactive. Okay, so how much time are we spending being reactive and people focused and proactive and task focused and all the ways that could reveal itself, right? So what do we want? Leading is more people focused and proactive. So let's say it looks more like this, and then not being too reactive and not being too task focused. So let's say that that's 70% here. Let's say that that's 30% here. And so we should be living in this kind of box over here. Well, that's what leadership looks like, right? Talk about this in our next episode. But if you're finding yourself being reactive and task focused and not the least bit people and proactive, then we're living over here. And that's what management looks like. Talk about that next time. But let's come back to those percentages. So if you're finding yourself 100% of the time managing and 0% of the time leading, let's go back to our original model, right? Then we're on this trajectory forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So we are managing 100% and leading 0%. It looks like this. We hope it continues this way. It's not going to. We hope, therefore, that it'll go like it's not going to. It'll probably end up there or even going down. You know, death by 1,000 cuts. No good. Neither, to be clear, do we want to be 0% managing and 100% leading, because then we're just getting too far up, too high view, too strategic, and not actually doing anything. So what we actually want, so we don't want either of these two. We don't want, let's put a big no around that and even an exclamation mark. We don't want anybody that says, okay, when I'm going to fix this, I'm just going to lead 100% of the time and manage. Okay, that's not what we want. We don't want manage 100 and lead 0. Neither do we want manage 0 and lead 100, right? What we want is that manage 30%, so we know where we're at and we know where we want to, and we want to lead 70%. That's our kind of our nominal goal. And then occasionally, situationally, depending on what's going on, so this here should be our goal. Occasionally, this flips over to 70-30. And what we're going to call this is a situational goal. So this is our strategic goal. And this is our tactical or our situational goal. Now, when we do this over here, which is this 30 manage, 70 lead, this is, to answer the original question, this is what on versus in looks like. That's what that actually looks like. So on and not in means a few things, not least comfort zones. Comfort zones are tricky because we all know there's no growth in our comfort zone and there's no comfort in our growth zone. So we're going to have to deal with some comfort zone issues. We know that we've got some habits to deal with, and we have developed our habits over a long time, and we don't turn that oil tanker around on a dime. So we've got some habits to deal with. We've got some beliefs to deal with, right? And we've got some good beliefs and we've got some self-limiting beliefs. So we're going to have to address those too. And again, these are all coming up in future episodes. We've got some blind spots to deal with, right? So there's a lot going on. And so we have to challenge some of these things. The first thing is we have to recognize those things. We can't fix something until we can see it, until we can recognize it. So we'll deal with all of those things too. So I guess all that's left for me to say today is thanks for being ever so gorgeous and tuning in to Stop Managing, Start Leading, and My Daily Leadership podcast. Whatever your reason for listening or watching today, I do hope that this episode offered you something of value, a tiny, teeny something, even if it's just one tool or one technique or one tip or one model that maybe improves your leadership ability by only 1%. Remember, there's immense power in marginal gains consistently applied over time. Einstein said that compound interest was the 8th wonder of the world. So who am I to argue with? Who are you to argue with Einstein? Also, look, there's lots of power in community too. So please do share your questions. Please do share your insights. and maybe even some topic suggestions in the comments. That'd be great if you're watching on YouTube, of course. And whilst you're down there, give this video a like, please, and subscribe too, why not? And for the auditory listeners out there, our ALs, you're only getting half the story, I'm afraid. So I highly recommend heading over to YouTube, where today's episode will drop and it'll come to life with visual notes and models and drawings and all of that kind of stuff. So next time, we're going to have a deeper dive into the key differences between how managers and leaders delegate tasks. But if you can't wait until then, why don't you head over to www.mydailyleadership.com for much more. So for now, I'm Antonio Garrido with My Daily Leadership. Thanks for being here. Until next time, by wisdom and effort, ta-ta, and see you next time.